You imagine me missing the thing? That'd be too bad. Being in charge of it and not taking it, wow, that'd be another level. Who here has used DDEV before? Cool. Who here has used something like it? Which is basically a Docker wrapper for your local development, mostly local. This DDEV can do casual hosting, or that's what they call it. So you can push it up to a web host, whether that's DigitalOcean or something else if you needed to. But they have a warning on that because it's not meant to replace Ansible or Terraform, and it's not like that. Performant when it comes to, like, if you wanted to upload it to a live site. But that's not its primary goal. Its primary goal is to make your life easy as a developer. Now let's get started. So what we're gonna cover today, I've done a couple of sessions about DDEV, and if you look up online, there's one that I did on DDEV versus Lando, which is another tool that does something similar. I've done one in advanced DDEV development. This one tries to give you a 10,000 foot view of why you may want to use DDEV and why some of the decisions that they took with the project are convenient for you as somebody who wants to grab a technology, produce something out of it, and potentially put it up in a server. Because if you're having it on your machine, you don't necessarily care about all the things that you have to get going with Docker. You just want the environment available to you, and you want all the tooling at your disposal. So we're going to look at the DDEV commands, some of the popular ones, some of the things that people use pretty often, a little bit about the community, and then also how it may compare to whichever tool you are using now. So let's get started. So I did this presentation at Longhorn PHP 2 weeks ago, and PHP developers use a bunch of different tooling depending on whether they come from the Laravel community, whether they're using a framework, whether they're not using anything, whether they're working on a PHP, the language itself. And it's funny because I got a lot of answers that were all across. Like, some people still be using MAMP and WAMP, and why not? Because that's a retro tool and it still works. And if you're not aware of what MAMP and WAMP are, it's basically a way of installing PHP, Apache, and all the stuff that you need for a server to live on your machine. But install it on your machine, and that is something that is a bit of a problem nowadays, because ideally the problem that Docker and DDEV solve is that if you get a new computer tomorrow, you want to be able to install it and set it up quickly and get up and running with a vanilla version of any tool that you want. Whether that's WordPress, whether that's Drupal, whether that's some JavaScript thing, you want to just get it up and running and get something that's close to production. And that's something that Docker gives you. But Docker Compose can be a bit challenging to learn, as you may know, because you have one Docker image, and now you have to have the web server talk to the database, talk to the npm image, talk to the composer image. So let's take a look at why DDEV could save you some time. DDEV, the project itself, to give you a little history, is written in Go, and that is slightly different from some of the competitors, because some competitors decided to use Electron, and Electron is a JavaScript framework that allows you to have cross-compatibility, so you could use it with Linux, Windows, or Mac. But Go has that out of the box because it was developed for it. So that has allowed the DDEV project to be ahead on most technology shifts. When Apple released the M1, DDEV had pretty much immediate support for the M1 architecture, and that was just because it's written in Go, and that's something that you inherit from the language that tool uses. It's backed by Opson, which is one of our sponsors, which, thanks to Opson for sponsoring the camp. But that means, if you didn't know, Opson is the platform that was known as Platform SH, and they actually sponsored the Symfony project, which is something that Drupal uses, Laravel uses, every other major PHP framework uses, except for WordPress. So it is not only used by you, and by you exploring this tool, you are not necessarily locking yourself into something that I'm telling you. You are locking yourself into something that all these companies are using and are recommended as their standard setup. So right now, DDEV is recommended as the standard configuration setup for Craft CMS, Drupal, Typo 3, Mautic, which is a different system altogether, and a couple of other ones. Now, hopefully you got a chance to pick up a DDEV shirt today, and that came as part of the DDEV Foundation initiative to just market DDEV and then just make sure that that we can get more people to speak about it and have a little love back to the community. And as you get to enjoy and use DDEV, don't forget that it's a 503c. So you are welcome to do any donations, or why not, at any point as you see fit and as you feel like giving back into the project, whether that's with code, with money, or other types of contributions. Now DDEV, if you're ever interested in seeing a DDEV site as a demo, DDEV.com is open source. And that'd be this website right here. So if you wanted to play with an Astro.js site and see how this is built and how the different pages in Markdown work, you can actually go to the GitHub repo for it and then just do DDEV start, and it will start it out of the box working for you. So if you are not necessarily a fan of PHP, but you want to have JavaScript in a way that's inside of a Docker container so it doesn't pollute all your binaries in the machine and it's easy to get started with, this is one way to do it. Now I usually go in here to look at the docs, and then once you jump into the docs, and hopefully it will load, then I'll usually end up going to the CMS quick starts. So after you set up DDEV, you likely are going to spend quite a bit of time just coming in here and then just looking at whichever PHP and non-PHP tool you're trying to get up and going, clicking on the install, and then just copy pasting the instructions. The instructions are set up in a way that it will even make the folder for you. Now, this is good and bad, right? Because eventually, and that happens to me, I end up with a lot of throwaway sites because you're testing something out quickly in WordPress, you want to test it and see if it works in Laravel, you're prototyping, you're moving quickly and seeing which tool might fit your need. Because at the end of the day, DDEV is just something to empower you to build whatever you need in the most seamless way possible with the least amount of obstacles. So let's go back to the slides. So one more thing before I pass here. At LaraCon and a couple of other events, I asked Laravel developers why they use DDEV, because some of them use a different tool. If you were on Lee's training, he talked about Herd, and there's a couple of other ones. So the problem with some of the other tools that are language specific, because every language usually has a tool that they recommend, and DDEV can do all of them, but it's not recommended by all of them as the main one. But the benefit you get with DDEV is that DDEV supports PHP all the way back to 5.6, and it goes all the way forward as 8.5. If you are inheriting a legacy application that has an old code base and an old database, more likely than not, if you're using Herd, for example, which is a Laravel product, they will only support about 7.2. And if it's older than that, well, you have to pay them. And that's fine. I mean, that's one way that they manage to make their project sustainable. But that's something that you don't have to worry with the DDEV project. And why not? Because that support is ingrained. And even though DDEV is free at the moment, at some point in the future, depending on how the sustainability of the project moves, there might be some premium features. As far as I'm aware, the project is stable in the sense that the features that are going to come in are just extra features that might be just something to add extra value in case people needed that, but not necessarily locking away any of the things that we already have. Now, OrbStack is like an equivalent to Docker Desktop, so it's a Docker Desktop competitor. A lot of people tend to like it. Is anybody using OrbStack in the room? Is supposed to be very fast and very performant to bring up your Docker images. I haven't used it personally. I know every Drupal core lead tends to love it just because of its performance. I tend to go for Colima or Lima because Docker Desktop, I mean, you need to have Docker running for DDEV to work, but you don't need Docker Desktop. And to me, Docker Desktop, when they change their license, and also because it's a little slow and every now and then the UI gets stuck, I find myself just using Colima and Lima, even though they don't have a graphic interface, more often, and they tend to be trouble. They tend to be less trouble than Docker Desktop. So, a little bit of the history. So the project is led by Randy and Stas. If you come to other Drupal events or other open source conferences, you may see Randy. We may have him drop by one of these days at this camp, and that'd be fantastic. And right now the project supports 26 plus tools. So there is about 26 different things, 26 different quick starts that you can have. So there might be some tools that you're familiar, some tools that you only heard about, and some tools that you never heard about, but you think that maybe they could be useful. You can go in there, copy paste, and get started. There's 164 community add-ons. So what is an add-on? An add-on, as you will see in a minute, is something that gives you extra functionality that you probably have on the server side, but you don't usually think as including in your local development. For example, that'd be Solar, that'd be Redis, or Valkyrie, which is like in memory databases, and a couple of other things that you may not think, oh, you know, I need this in my local, because you're probably not going to have that level of load. But if you're testing something for a bigger website or a bigger application, you may want to have that capability. And Randy is really good at adding contributor training. So if you want to know in depth about any of the things that I'm going to cover today, you can go to DDEV, to the blog, and go through the list of different items if you want to extend the web server, the database, and why not. But as I said, and this is a big important factor, DDEV is about developers' happiness and productivity, not necessarily about having the smallest, most performant application. And I will tell you a little more about that in a minute, but keep that in mind. So if you are somebody who is more concerned about keeping everything lean, you might butt heads with DDEV every now and then. But this is just about getting you started, getting you going, and making sure that you can ship products, which is kind of like the Laravel mantra, but I feel like DDEV kind of follows that as well. Make sure that you can get out the door and sell more, or do whatever you have to do with that website or application. So today we're going to cover a little bit about the architecture and the project structure. How does it look like when you get started with DDEV? What tools do you need? A little bit about the DDEV commands, how you manage a database, the hooks, and a couple of other things. And I have a couple of examples that might be exciting for you all, because you might be triggered by the fact that, oh, I didn't even know that was a possibility that I could do. And the first time I gave this session, I feel like it might have been a little too intense, because there's a lot of content, and I could probably spend quite a bit on each of them. But if you get questions while I'm going, feel free to ask, because I can always jump around, because I've done a couple of different versions of this. And if that helps, I know that probably trigger a special interest in a couple of different things. Okay, so how does the DDEV architecture work? So if you look at this, DDEV, when you install it, it will bring down 3 Docker images. The DDEV, well, actually, maybe a little more than that. It brings 5, but usually only 3 that are used between the different projects, which are the web server, the database server, and whatever else you're trying to add on as an add-on. But by default is the web server, database server, the router, and the SSH agent. The SSH agent and the router, you just get them once every time you update DDEV. The web server and the database server, you get 1 per project. So if you're doing a Drupal project and a WordPress project, you're probably going to have a web server and a database server for each one of those. Now, if you used Lando before, Lando worked slightly differently, where it will pull down the Docker images themselves, so you could have just like the Redis database, or it was more container orchestration that it was developer productiveness. And what I mean by that is Lando will let you pull any Docker image that was on the Docker Hub, and that is fine. But the challenge with that is sometimes you want things pre-configured for you. Nobody can pre-configure anything if they let you bring in as many add-ons as you want. So the DDEV things that you get are already pre-configured and the commands are at your disposal as soon as you bring them down. And that's something that's kind of unique to DDEV, but then at least for me personally as a developer, I don't want to have to install npm or Composer or whichever other tool is there if you know my tool already knows that that's what I'm trying to set up as a project. So that's something you get out of the box with it. We talked a little bit about the add-ons. There's a ton of them out there, whether you want to use browser sync, whether you want to use something with Beat or Playwright to test your site. Now, how does the project structure look? Because I know in an intro session, you're probably wondering, well, oh, great. So what do I do to set it up? So the first thing you do to set up DDEV is you bring up a project, whichever project you have. And if I'm setting up a new computer, I will usually go to the terminal and then just use brew. I mean, you're welcome to use something else if you like, but if you just use brew and then you tell it to install DDEV, it will do that, and it will bring a couple of different things. It will bring the binary. It will also bring the global DDEV folder, and you may or may not be aware of the global DDEV folder because it's not something you have to. 99% of the time you never have to do anything to it, except for let me bring that up, because there is a scenario where having access to the global DDEV folder is handful, and that is if you're trying to look at the default commands that DDEV provides. I'll make that big, because when you install DDEV and add it to a project, you will get a folder very similar to this, except for it doesn't. This is the global one, not the one per project. So this one adds a couple of bin directories and a couple of other things. But the nice thing that the global one has that lives under your username is that it includes some of the commands that DDEV hosts, that DDEV comes with. So if you go into the commands, you can see the command for MariaDB, because DDEV, because it's already pre-configured and ready for you to go. Let's say, let's put a use case. You're installing WordPress or you're installing Drupal, and I tell you, go to the database and tell me if the thing that you install actually register anything in the database, or figure out if that plugin is actually working or if it's going to corrupt any of the information. On DDEV, you basically just have to go to that DDEV directory. Let me make that big. You tell it DDEV Table Plus. Table Plus is a graphic application that basically opens up the database and it gives you all the database tables and whatnot. And then that opens up that database and that's there for you. I mean, right now, some of this stuff is empty, some of this stuff is used. But let me tell you something, whether you're using PHP or anything else, if you're using any kind of application and you're touching the database, you at some point probably want to make sure that whatever change you're making is not going to corrupt the database, and maybe explore a little bit of the information that's going in it, or how that CMS or framework is using it. And DDEV, out of the box, shares the credentials from within Docker to like 5 or 7 different database visualizers, because there's Database Beaver, there is Table Plus, there's MySQL Workbench, and all of those basically let you have some of this, which is just a way of querying the database and looking at like some of the information that you have inside, and whether, you know, the change that you made is gonna be fine or not, whether you're migrating something. That's a pretty cool thing that DDEV has. Now, let me do a clear here. So I told you that, you know, the one problem with DDEV is it makes things so easy that sometimes you're going to end up with a lot of projects. So you have things like DDEV describe is one of the commands that you're probably going to use a lot, which tells you what the URL for the project is. It tells you a little bit about the different ports, if you want to use 443 or 80, which are the default unless you're using some other port, which version of the database you're using. DDEV supports MariaDB, MySQL, and Postgres, and it has a bunch of different versions. It tells you what the username and password is, but you never have to use that, because you know how I did just DDEV Table Plus? It will already share those credentials with the Table Plus application or anything else. In the past, I used some other tool called Lando, and I used a couple of others, and in those, when you go to any database application visualizer, you have to give it where that database is, try to locate the IP of the thing, then give it the username and password, and it can take a little while for you to connect. And so people end up using phpMyAdmin, which is all right. I mean, if you only have phpMyAdmin, you know, it's okay. But let's not deny phpMyAdmin sometimes is not the fastest thing. So that's something that DDEV can save you time with. Now, if I do a DDEV list, then you get to see all the different projects that I have. And I've been trying to structure it a couple of different ways and whatnot, and most of them are stopped or powered off. And the reason why I'm showing you all these projects is that I like to contribute to Drupal, contributed to a couple of projects on Astro and a couple of other things. And every now and then you want to start a clean version of that thing and just clone it from GitHub and start from there, so you don't have to deal with any legacy. And DDEV just makes it super easy for you to get a new thing going, whether that's PHP or not, get it going. And something that I like that I only seen DDEV has is that it gives you the full path of where that thing is stored. Why is that important? Because it's important because before DDEV, other tools they will keep track internally of where the thing was installed, but if you delete the folder, DDEV does mutagen to sync the files inside of the Docker container. And if you delete something, every now and then you will have some odd issues and some odd errors because you didn't tell the application itself. So DDEV makes it fairly quickly, and it gives you hints on that. I deleted this folder because I didn't want anything inside of the DDEV folder or inside of the contribution folder, and it will tell me, oh, you want me to clean it up, and it will clean it up for you. So that's just a fantastic little utility there. So let's get back here. So I was telling you a little bit about the DDEV structure, right? So when you install DDEV on a project, you're installing Drupal, you run the quick start, which are the commands I was showing you earlier. You're gonna have a .DDEV folder. And the .DDEV folder, which is at the root of the project, is gonna have all of these subfolders inside. DDEV works through folders. So it's very similar to Symfony, Drupal, even WordPress for that matter. You know, you put stuff on WP content because WordPress knows that that's where some of the files that it needs are going to live, and it knows how to handle those. So in DDEV, if you wanted to add more commands, you usually go in here inside of the commands tab, you open it up, and you decide whether you want to add them to the web image, the database image, and whether you want to add them to the host. Now the host was the biggest one that it took me a little while to wrap my hair around. And so the host means that it's gonna run on the machine itself. So you saw me type DDEV table plus, right? So if you wanted to bundle DDEV commands, so you could export the database. So you could do like a gzip. If you wanted to use the DDEV name and the DDEV directory, you will put them inside a host, and it will do everything inside of the web container and inside of the database. If you only needed the files inside of the web container or inside of the database, you could just add them on the database ones. So that's that. So inside of this folder you have the .DDEV with the ability to add commands, to look at all the other stuff that DDEV is adding, and then you have a config.yaml file. This config.yaml, if you did the quick start and you tell it Drupal or PHP or Laravel or WordPress or anything else, it will have the project name and it will come with some default data in here. And that default data includes what database version you want, if you want to change the domain name, if you want to add a couple of other things, and a couple of other safe defaults that most likely you're going to need or that you want to implement. You are welcome to change this file at any point after it gets created, and you just have to do a DDEV restart and it will try to bring down the database version that you asked for it. Or if you want to switch from Nginx to like Apache, or if you want to switch to something else, you can just click in there and it will be swapped. You can also swap some of these. Instead of editing the YAML file directly, DDEV has directives like xdebug enable is usually false, because if you done any PHP debugging, xdebug, it can slow down your application significantly. But you can toggle it by just setting the flag to true and restarting it, or by just running the command with DDEV and telling the xdebug, kind of like you will do like here, like you have DDEV config help, you tell xdebug -true, and it will do the change in the YAML file, so you don't necessarily have to change the files if you don't want as much. So I mentioned a little bit about DDEV and the project architecture. So when the DDEV web server is up and running, is using Mutagen to sync the files on your local folder. So you can DDEV SSH into the web server, and you will see those files being in sync with your local. So you're only really editing the local files. You don't have to DDEV SSH or SSH into the container itself, because it's already syncing them for you. Okay, so there's that. So every now and then you will have to do something global, because you want to add a command and you have like 5 projects. You have like a WordPress, a Drupal, a Laravel project, and you're like, you know what? I don't want to keep adding this custom command to do whatever it is, whether that is a run, bun, or some other type of JavaScript thing. Or whether it's to install a new thing like Composer, or own equivalent to Composer, which is a PHP package manager. You can install it in the global folder. If you install it on the global folder, any projects that you create will include that if you give it the right directive. Now, what are some of the perks of having DDEV? NPM comes built in. You don't have to worry about installing NPM. Other tools makes you add it in the config.yaml file and makes you tell it where NPM is supposed to live, but DDEV doesn't. Xdebug is supported. And if you know about PHP and Drupal and any other kind of debugging an application is going to save you a lot of time, but you want that to be built in your local. Otherwise, you're going to pull your hairs out, because that's one of the hard things to do. Debugging, I mean, the only framework that I know that makes debugging fairly easy is .NET. And then after that is JavaScript, only because they added it to the Chrome browser. And then after that, now it's PHP, because now you can have it if you use the right tool. But if you don't use the right tool, believe me, remember this. Go to DDEV if you're going to do xdebug. I'm going to save you a couple of hours. You also have Drush built in, which is the command for the command line utility for Drupal, but that also includes Artisan, which is the one for Laravel, and like every other, depending on the project, you don't have Artisan if you're not using Laravel, because why will you need that? It doesn't load it. And the same thing with Drupal, but if you are using Drupal, you will get all of the things that is expected of a Drupal project. You get something called database snapshots. So database snapshots, every now and then, I will give you a scenario because that's probably a little easier to digest. Every now and then you go to a website or an application, whether that is Drupal, WordPress, or something else. And then if you're using Git, you have a way of tracking your code changes. But because these applications have a UI, sometimes you poke around the UI and then you realize, well, I might be close to a point of no return because I want to hit that button and see what it does. But every now and then it ends up effing up the database or having like a big issue in it, and then you're like, everything is down, black screen of death. You know, this is what I get for going too far or trying that. And then the easy fix for that is you just import the database again, and then you're back up and running, because hopefully you had backups. However, if you are importing a database and the database is large, that might take a minute. And you may not want to do that if you're doing CI/CD or continual integration, because you want to have something faster, a little more nimble. And a DDEV snapshot is the equivalent to an rsync to a file, but in the database world. So if you're familiar with using rsync, which is basically an incremental build, DDEV snapshot basically does that. So it's whatever snapshot, whatever you wanted to change. Like if you have the database right now and you are like, you know what, I want to get back to this point, but I want to delete every record and then do some modification to see what happens. You can do a DDEV snapshot and it will bring you back, but in 1/10 of the time that it will take you to do a database import and whatnot. So that's one of the underutilized tools that DDEV provides that others couldn't, just because DDEV has complete control of the database images. If it didn't provide, and I don't know if I made this clear, but the database the DDEV web server and the database, both Docker images, all the Docker images that DDEV provide are customized to make sure they work well together. So they are not something you will find out of the box or out of stock. So they are a little heavier than usual, but then that also means that you get a lot of goodies out of them. Now, you have Corpan enabled if you're ever trying to do anything with Yarn or PNPM or a couple of the other JavaScript based package managers. You may want to add that, just because that will allow you to have the latest versions of Yarn and PNPM. Nowadays, most people I think are okay with NPM, except for the last issues that they had in the last couple of weeks with bugs and wormholes and a couple of other security problems. But that's something to keep in mind if you're using Yarn. Now, let me highlight a few features that DDEV has added in 2024. So if you're using CI/CD, you can skip the hooks, because sometimes you can have how in the life cycle of a computer, any kind of application, you can have a hook when it starts, when the database loads, when the database detaches, when the application shuts down. DDEV has all of those hooks, and sometimes you want to have one of those to have like hot module reloading, which is a feature that front-end developers love, and I love it myself because it allows you to edit something on the page without having to refresh the page itself. And that's powered by Beat and a bunch of other tools, and it works great if you're using it just on your machine, but if you put it in Docker, you'll lose some of that because of the abstraction of it running inside of another computer. I also added like a constraint, because sometimes if you're using DDEV, you want to make sure people are on the latest version of the utility. So now you can constrain it so people update, kind of like force them to update. And depending on what tool you're using currently, forcing your team to upgrade is not the best thing. At least when I was using Lando, updating Lando had the issue that will more than likely break something. So people tend to update Lando a little less than they do DDEV. But with DDEV, you don't have that concern. And then I added a couple of highlights of what changed on the 2025 year. So they reduced the size of the images, so they're a little smaller and a little more performant, because there was a little bit of a bloat that comes from making developers happy. Because giving you all the tools and utilities at your disposal also means that it's not the leanest tool out there. But it will get you very far very quickly. So, some of the common commands that I was telling you: DDEV star, DDEV describe, list, restart, stop and delete. Pretty average for a tool of its, pretty average for something that does this much for other tools that are comparable to it. Now, I'm gonna do something that is kind of cool and different. I'm gonna start, so a command that DDEV has that not a lot of people use is DDEV share. DDEV share allows you to use ngrok. Who here is familiar with ngrok? Ngrok is a reverse proxy tunneling thing that allows you to, in plain English, it allows you to connect to my computer and see a website that I have installed locally. And it goes through all VPNs, all firewalls. It's kind of cool and nifty and different in that regard. So let me go here. Let me stop it and do a DDEV launch. So this is the site. As I have it right now, and this is the site that I was using for Longhorn PHP, so I'm going to change it once I start sharing it. So let me go back here. I'm going to do a Drush ULI, which is something that's Drupal specific, and then log in, and I'm going to go back here, go back to the home page, and then I'm going to change this text as soon as you guys start looking at that on your devices, so you can see that you're actually connecting to that one. So I'm going to do a DDEV share, and then I'm going to add this QR code, and if you can pull out your phone and scan that QR code, that's just going to take you to Safari, and you're going to start connecting to my machine on a school network, which is kind of cool and odd, because school networks tend to have a lot of security, and it tends to give you might see a warning about connecting to ngrok and why not, and if you click visit site, or if you ignore the warning, you should see that page that I had over there. And let me now switch up to the console, and if you see the console, there's a bunch of traffic that's coming in because ngrok is proxying the information, and it's basically sending you to their server, then back to my computer to serve you some of the files. Now I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to change something about the page. So let me go to a not that. There we go. So I want to name it Open Source Camp 2025 and save. On the back to side, and then if you reload that page, you should be getting the updated version that is going through my phone, through my laptop, and why not? And if you got that, give me a thumbs up. Hey, cool. So isn't that cool? Because every now and then you have a project where you're like, I want to share this with my grandma who might be here or miles away or in a different country, and you have the issue, well, I have to pay for hosting or something else. But with this, you can share anywhere you like, and they will connect back to you, and then, you know, you can take it down as soon as you stop the DDEV share. Now, you might be wondering, well, that's probably a paid product, and then I don't know if I want to pay for that. Actually, ngrok, what you are using right now, is free, and the only thing you have to do is go in here, sign up, and then it's free because they have it rated, but DDEV has an add-on that lets you use Cloudflare, and Cloudflare has like a Cloudflare tunnel thing, and that is fully free and it's not rated down. But if you go inside of the pricing for ngrok, you have the free tier, and the free tier doesn't give you infinite bandwidth, so you couldn't abuse it and then just host a site out of like a Raspberry Pi or something if you had a lot of traffic. But for something that you're testing, you can just use it and share the site and then get some quick feedback. Or you can use it to test something with a mobile device. You wouldn't believe how many times I know working here at UTC and a couple of other places, you have an issue where it's only happening on mobile and it's only happening on your phone. And yes, you can try to bring up the inspector inside of Chrome and be like, I want to have the different devices in here, which is what people usually use. But those devices sometimes are not the same as a real device, and then it will give you still some issues, and why not? So having the ability to run it on your phone can save you quite a bit of time. So yeah, so that's one of the demos that I wanted you to be aware of. Let's get it back and let me run quickly through it because I know we're running out of time. DDEV launch. So DDEV, I told you DDEV does a lot of things for you. Sometimes if you're setting up a project with Drupal or WordPress or anything else, you wanna just open Mailpit. How many of you have used Mailpit before for anything? If you haven't, that is like a utility that basically lets you intercept emails going out of your site, because at some point you're gonna have to send emails. If you're doing a camp website, if you're doing anything, you have to send some information out. But you don't want to test it with a live account. You certainly don't want to pay, and most services out there charge you for it. There's no free tiers for emails. Well, DDEV already comes with Mailpit pre-hooked to it. So as long as you don't give it anything else, if I went into this Drupal site and I haven't changed anything, and I log out and I tell it to reset my password, it will send me an email to Mailpit, like this example right here, and it will go right in and it will give me all the information that I need to know about it, the headers, whether the email is going fine, and I didn't have to pre-configure it. So that's the beauty of it, because if you had to configure Mailpit, you know what pain in the body can be to try to reroute mail traffic to it from any kind of application. But if the application already does that for you because it knows there's nothing else that is pointing to, then that's a benefit you just inherit. Snapshots, check it out, tiny, fast for prototypes. In the slides, I added information about the different commands, because you have global commands, you have commands that are specific to a project, and commands that are specific to the tool itself. Like I was telling you about Table Plus, Beaver, and a couple of other things. DDEV is easy to update. You're looking at the 2019 version of this file and the 2025 version. And if you see it, there's slight changes between the two, but you can actually run a DDEV command and it will look at your configuration and figure out what needs to change to update it, and it will update it on the fly for you. And if you were working with other people, you can add a constraint, and that way it will force them to update. Because if you are managing a team or working with a team of developers, you don't want to have to be dealing with somebody's configuration just because they are afraid of updating. So if they are afraid of updating, you can push them a little bit to update to the latest version. And if you were to push them to the latest version, this is what they will get. They will get they couldn't do a DDEV star, so they kind of have to update. And at that point, if there's actually an issue, you can report it on the Discord channel or in the Drupal Slack channel, and a lot of the maintainers will jump in and try to figure out if it is you the problem or it's actually the application. Because let's be honest, a good percentage of the time is us who made the issue, because we typed something wrong or we had an issue with the YAML file. So environment variables. You might be wondering, well, great, how do I pass Google Analytics? How do I pass other stuff? You can do that fairly easy with DDEV. You can do it in a couple of different ways. I show you that DDEV has a folder structure, but you can give it a .env file at the root level of the .DDEV folder, and it will pick those. Or inside of the YAML file, that's config.yaml that you saw a second ago, this file, you can add the keys in there as the web environment and give it something, and then it will load those keys into the application without you having to do anything special inside of the container. Yeah, the DMB files. Let's see what else. Custom commands. If you are a master of Linux, Bash, any kind of console level thing, DDEV lets you have it. I mean, some systems are a wrapper to Docker, but the problem is that you have to learn to use JavaScript or something else. DDEV is just only a wrapper for the functionality, but it empowers you. If you're a system admin, you can use anything that you used before as a command in the terminal or somewhere else with Bash inside of DDEV, including all of the bash flags and anything else in there. So one thing that is important to notice is if you're trying to add a second database to DDEV, you're trying to fight the system. DDEV is meant to be one database per project. So if you're trying to have two projects communicate, there's a really easy way that you can tell the DDEV router, hey, project A, talk to project B, or project B, expose the database back to me because I want to talk to you and you're a WordPress project and I want to migrate some information. Don't try to jam the second database inside of project A because you want to have a Drupal or a WordPress project that has 5 databases. That's not something that's natural. You can have, and what I mean by that is you can have multiple, you only have one database container, but you can have multiple MySQL databases as long as they are contained within that container, which MySQL allows you to, because you can have MySQL database 1, MySQL database 2. You just don't try to have a different Docker image running for a database, because then you lose a lot of the benefits that DDEV gives you out of the box. A lot of the tooling and why not. You could make it just as a custom Docker file and you could add it through an add-on, but then the system doesn't know about that because that's ephemeral and that's something that you added manually. So to save you time, if you add a second database, add a second project, and then just tell the two projects talk to each other, and they will talk to each other and you could connect to either one. So there's that. If you are using anything advanced and you're trying to run anything on a port, if like for Astro, I told you about DDEV.com, check out the GitHub repo because I added a way in there to have hot module reloading, and hot module reloading in JavaScript requires you to open a port because it's basically doing an npm run dev and then executing the website over and over as soon as you type something, as soon as you change a CSS class or you change some HTML and reflecting that in the page. But that requires you to like expose an extra port in DDEV, and that's not something that everybody does very commonly. I feel like a lot of front-end developers just refresh the page with DDEV because that's not something that perhaps they are super interested in looking, or they're not super interested in spending the time learning how to get that up and going. But you have an example because DDEV.com has it, and that's one of the reasons why we keep that one up to date. So check it out. Talk about conditional logic. I talk about executing some of the commands, some of the hooks that you can have. If you wanted to play with traffic, traffic is what runs the router itself. So if you're familiar with it, you're welcome to go to it. You just have to hit the local host and that port number. And at the end of the slides, I have a link to the slides. So you could take them home and check them out later and see which one of these solutions might be able to fit that use case you have. DDEV is not a replacement for Ansible or any other tool that you might use in production, but it's something that will let somebody else check out a framework or a CMS quickly and get up and running. Any questions up to this point? I know I'm getting close to the end, and I don't want to keep the next presenter waiting too long. Go ahead, Josh.
Just a quick question. Can I manage DDEV over SSH?
Yes, you can.
Awesome.
I don't know why would you need to, because everything that DDEV provides you has a DDEV command itself, so you wouldn't need to SSH into the container itself, but you definitely can.
Because the idea is that I'm connecting into a remote server, and that server is going to act as a web host.
That's correct, but that server doesn't have the database. So if you're connecting to the web host has access to the database through the backend, but you don't necessarily get the database right there. So you have to SSH into the database server if you wanted to get database specific stuff, or just query MySQL directly.
Because it would be a machine that has different VMs, and like one VM would have the database, and the other VM would actually be the web host.
Right. It would be different machines. I mean, you
This
could.
doesn't have to be answered right now, because I know we're like short on time, but if you
Yeah.
want to sit down and talk sometime.
Sure, yeah, we definitely can talk about how some of that might work. I'd be interested to see if for your use case, because you can decline the database for DDEV and just have the web server, because sometimes people just want to have the web server and have something on Node, on Astro, and maybe just having the web server be something quick and easy that you can have to SSH and have a Dockerized version of that, and then just give the sysadmin that Docker image if you needed to, or just publish it wherever you want to have it. Yep. So I added a couple of examples in there. I think we covered most of the highlights. If you're using any of the hosting providers, there's a file that has the RSync version for that if you want to RSync the database up, or if you want to bring it down. The platform message, Acquia, Pantheon ones are the ones that have been sponsored in the past, so they keep getting updates, and every now and then they're a little nicer. This area is something that I feel like DDEV could do a little better, because syncing the database is not as easy as it was like with Land and a couple of other things that integrated it a little bit better. But it does teach you a lot about the power of doing that in slightly different ways, and how those tools are actually just a wrapper for that. Any resources, if you want more merch, because DDEV has a merch store as any open source project, check it out. This is on the DDEV homepage on the footer. You can go to the threadless one and you can get a pillow, a mug, all that kind of stuff. You know, if you want to support the project.
Batmans?
Yeah. Everything. I added the
Do you
Batman.
have some of those in your bag?
No, I know, right? I didn't bring the Batman this time around, but that's a very popular one. And a little controversial, because people were like, Batmans? And they were like, Randy loved them. I was like, oh, you can get out of the shower. I think I took it to one of the camps, and people were like, what? That's the giveaway? Okay. Well, fun stuff. And
Pickleball rackets?
no, not yet. I know Weston is probably, they need to add that to like the gift shops, because I feel like that'd be next level. I mean, if you can give somebody a DDEV pickleball racket, maybe that's it, you know, sign up a new sponsor.
Right there.
Yeah. So if you want to join our user group, or if you have more questions, this is usually where you will find us. This is the DDEV Discord one, the Chattanooga one, the PHP, and the Laravel one. Any questions? I know we're getting towards the end. And if not, I
You
haven't.
need to update your platform message to Upson.
I do need to update the platform message to Upson. I know they probably be. I did thank them at the beginning though, so I guess it is that they get a half and half, a little bit of love and a little bit of extra, a little bit of a hard time. So that link will take you straight to the slides, so you can take a look at the slides later, because I know it's a lot of information in there and a lot of stuff that sometimes takes a little bit to digest. And feel free to ping me on like a bunch of different channels, Drupal Slack, the Drupal Chattanooga one, Discord. I'm in Discord because of the DDEV one, and a couple of other channels inside of PHP. And yeah, any other questions? And if not, thank you. Cool. Let me stop the recording.